Welcome.
Hey, everybody.
Welcome.
Welcome to session 3. Hi, Carla. Hi, Carrie.
Good to see you. Welcome.
Hi, Pamela. Hi, Dan and Peg.
As
Nice
you
to see all the
arrive,
familiar faces. Hi, everybody.
yes, good to see you.
Great to see everyone.
As you arrive,
Hi,
stood
Joe.
by this piece of art here, and we just invite you to share who you are, where you are, and you can be creative with this, what room you are zooming in from, what land you are zooming in from. We are on Tongva Gabrielino land, as well as Agakman land here in Orange, in California. And we're so grateful for the continued presence and wisdom of the indigenous community in our area. And we lift up their prayers um, for having been recognized as a tribe legally. We lift up their prayers for that. And so we encourage you to share in whatever way feels natural for you, who you are, where you are. And also one of the most meaningful gifts you've received. What is a favorite gift that you've received that had a lot of meaning for you? Just share that in the chat as we let people arrive here. And again, it's so good to see all your faces.
Welcome to session 3.
Yes, Growing Together session 3.
Hi, Dan and Jim and Diane, Joe. Hi, Richard. Hi, Felicia.
Yes, and as you continue to arrive, who you are, where you are, and a favorite or meaningful gift that you have received.
Yes, hello, everyone. Hi, Kevin.
Oh, I see here, favorite gift, horseback riding lessons when I was 10 years old. Oh, how wonderful.
So we all
My
did.
husband, from Pamela, my husband bought me straw bales and great compost for my garden. Oh my gosh. Oh, our sons and grandchildren from Carla. Oh, beautiful. Well, we encourage you to continue to, as we reflect on this Robin Wall Kimmerer quote, particularly the end of it, when all the world is gift in motion, how wealthy we become. All of these gifts.
Oh my God.
Thank you for continuing to put those in the chat. Thank you for sharing who you are, where you are, and however you arrived to us this evening. We are so grateful for the time that you have chosen to spend with us. So thank you. We are glad that you are here. And just in honoring of time, we are going to turn now towards our prayer, grounding and rooting in prayer. And so, as many of you know, today, as some of you don't know, but as many of you know, today is the Global Day of Action, Sacred People, Sacred Earth, put on by Green Faith and their whole international network of multi-faith leaders. And so we join today as we gather in our own way, a whole clustering of people who are gathering virtually and safely social distanced across the world in honor of healing our common home and imagining ways we can do this together. So today, as we reflect on purchasing and the implications of those choices and how to imagine a new way of being, thinking about the global community of faith leaders who are committed to this kind of work with us today and throughout this entire day. And so as we begin, we have a lot that we're going to unpack together today. And I know we are all coming from various places in our days. So we are just going to open up before we pray with about 40 seconds, not too long at all, of silence. And so I'm going to go ahead and light us a candle and just begin to orient us to where we are. And I encourage you to use this time of silence to cross the threshold from wherever you were to being here in this community this evening. So I'm going to go ahead and invite us into about 30 seconds, 30 to 40 seconds of silence, and then we will read a prayer together before we continue. And it is in this spirit of silence that holds all of our grief and all of our longing and all of the power and possibility of our communal presence here tonight, that we will say this prayer that so many have said today by our global faith leaders. We are united by a fundamental belief that all people, all living things, and the earth are sacred. As we consider the state of our world today, our hearts do overflow with concern. We know a far better future is possible if our collective response to the pandemic and the climate crisis is guided by compassion, love, and justice at a scale that meets this moment. We must not only provide the relief that so many need to survive, we must also create a new culture and economy of life that heals people and planet. We envision a world transformed in which humanity in all its diversity has developed a shared reverence for life on Earth. Together, we are building resilient, caring communities and economies that meet everyone's needs and protect the planet, an era of cooperation and community. The good life is one of connectedness with each other and with all of nature. It is a world of flourishing life that replaces despair with joy, scarcity with shared abundance, and privilege with justly distributed resources. The work to create this future begins with us, begins now. Compassion, love, and justice require no less of us all. Amen. And if you would like to learn more about this day and the 10 commitments that people around the world are committing to, you can do so on their website. And Becky just put the link in the chat. So thank you for being here today. Thank you for holding this space and time with us tonight. And now just going over a brief plan for our time. We did prayer and welcome. Welcome to all of you who have arrived in the meantime. And then we're going to move into a time of education and inspiration. There will be 2 pieces to the education, as we have done historically, with breakout room after each. And then we will have those conversations facilitated by your conversation guides, which we will also post in the chat. And then we'll close with a time of implementation and also be really thinking about implementation throughout. Just a brief reminder of our community guidelines. We co-create this space with you. And just committing to being present, speaking kindly, listening deeply, sharing generously, honoring all voices, and being open-hearted. We also just want to remind you this is being recorded. So if you need to turn off video for any reason, the session will be recorded, but the breakout rooms will not. So that's a safe place for you to be and share. This is hopefully a safe place for you to be and share no matter what. We did want to let you know that we're recording. And then the last thing is we will go about 1:15, and we have been really thinking about this, and we want time to be able to reflect deeply. So we're going to go 1:15. And if you need to leave, no worries, we are recording. And with that, I'm going to move us now officially into our session topic for today, purchasing, living simply and justly. We are going to be taking a large scale overview, grounding first in our faith. Then we're going to be looking historically at how we got here, and then taking a really practical case study, looking at a fictional church that we are running a case study on how we make a good purchasing choice. And always grounding in our framework of what does good look like on multiple levels? What does a good purchase look like? Well, it has to be good for us, good for our neighbor, good for creation. And really today, we're going to be spending a lot of time with what is a good purchase, or thinking about a purchase that is good across time look like. And of course, all these things interact. So some guiding questions to get us started. How do we live well as Christians in the consumer culture we find ourselves within? We're really going to be exploring this question with Dr. Ruth Valerio in the interview that I had the privilege and joy of doing with her and sharing with you all tonight. Then asking this question, what is the environmental and ethical impact of our consumerism and our consumer choices? And why are we even still talking about it? We've known this is bad for years, and here we are still talking about it. So kind of going to figure out what's going on there. And then how do we model purchasing practices in our churches that are good on these multiple levels and inspire congregational response? Because just like the gospel, our church, it's great within our church, but the impact multiplies tremendously when we invite people to participate across our congregations and communities. And so moving now particularly into our first part of education, talking about what's the relationship between Christianity and our consumer culture that we find ourselves within. So to help us do that, we are going to look at an interview with Dr. Ruth Valerio. Dr. Ruth Valerio is a theologian, environmentalist, social activist, and author. She is also the global advocacy and influencing director of Tear Fund, which is an organization that has the vision of inspiring and equipping Christians across the world to respond to poverty and bringing movements that impact lasting change on issues that affect the poorest and most vulnerable in our communities. She holds an honorary doctorate in theology from King's College London, and honorary doctorates from universities of Winchester and Chichester. You're never going to get it. And she is also the canon theologian at Rochester and has written several books. Today, we are really going to be talking with her in this interview about her book, Just Living Faith and Community in an Age of Consumerism. And to open up the interview with her, I asked her this question that I found really alive in her book and in the work that she does, and in the gospel itself. How is relationship, or an economy that is relational, not transactional, where that embodies this vision of health as membership, Wendell Berry's idea from his essay, Health as Membership, where community is the smallest unit of economic flourishing, alive in her book and in the gospel. And we really focused on this relational rather than transactional through line. And so with that, I'd love to turn this over to share this interview with Dr. Ruth Valerio with you all.
Thank you. Yeah, you're absolutely right. For me, a relational understanding of the gospel is what is at the heart of the book, and at the, more importantly, at the heart of my life, and at the heart, I really think, of what the gospel is all about. And so Jesus came to restore relationships, of course, between ourselves and God. We know that that's the fundamental basis of our faith. But then also he came to restore relationships between ourselves. So Galatians 3:28, Ephesians 2, other places, that ministry of reconciliation with one another. Mm-hmm. And then Colossians 1:15-20, Romans 8, he also came in order to restore our relationship with the whole wider natural world. And so the good news of Jesus Christ isn't only about restored individual relationship with God, but it's about that restoration of relationship on a holistic level. Mm-hmm. So when I think about the kind of the way that I shop, the food I buy, the kind of clothes that I wear, it's not just about a transactional responsibility. It comes down to me wanting to live in a way that lives out that gospel of relationship. So thinking about who is my neighbor and how can I be a neighbor? I think about my neighbor living thousands of miles away, who picks my tea or sews my clothes, and I want to be a good neighbor to them. Or I think about creatures living in my garden, in my own space, or in other ecosystems around the world, and I'm called to be a good neighbor to them and to restore my relationship with them. So at the heart of the gospel is that concept of relationship, and it's out of that we then want to live in ways that respect this world and all the creatures that live in it, human and wider.
Yeah, that you spoke so beautifully there too, at the heart of the gospel being this ministry of reconciliation and partnering with God in reconciling all of these relationships in the world. And we find ourselves in a broken system. And also parts of, we have participated in the brokenness of that system. Yeah. And so I wonder if we have this vision of Christianity and being a Christian, being a follower of Christ, as participating in this work of reconciliation of all of these relationships, ourselves, our neighbors, the created world. You asked this question in the book of what and how do we live well then as Christians in this consumer society that we find ourselves within, in this broken system that we find ourselves within. So I wonder how you would reflect on that.
Yeah, I think we live in a highly consumer society that wants to train us and form us to live in particular ways and to carry particular values and characteristics. So it teaches us that money is God and that possessions are God and they're what we should seek after with all our heart. It teaches us that other people are there to produce our goods. They're there to give us what we need. That fundamentally we are the most important ones, and other people are just there to serve us, and divides us into producers and consumers. And similarly with the wider natural world, our consumer society teaches us to see it as the environment, just something that's there to serve us and give us what we need. And all of that goes against what we see in the scriptures as to that we can't serve God and money. Money is not our God, God is, and we're to seek first his kingdom and his righteousness and justice, rather than seeking after lots of possessions and a comfortable life. It teaches us to put the other first rather than ourselves. And the Bible teaches us that the wider world isn't there just for us to use and abuse. It's there for us to cherish and enjoy and to live in as part of the wider natural world. So there's a real challenge on us as we live in this culture that wants to form us in a particular way. How actually can we root ourselves in Christ and in disciplines and habits and practices so that we're formed rather in the likeness of Christ? And that's what Just Living really is an exploration of.
Yeah, no, it's such this tension, which I think in the book you describe as this invitation to the middle way. This tension of belonging to this world that God loves, but also making sure that in that mutual belonging, we are creating ever more and more a world of these reconciled relationships, rather than becoming more and more complicit in the broken relationships and breaking more and more of them. So I wonder if we have this call as Christians to think differently about consumerism, even that term consumerism, what might, if we were to make a choice, just a choice about a particular item that we might need. So if I'm a church and I need to buy a plate for my congregation, how might I begin to think very practically about this choice of buying a plate from a theological framework of mutual reconciliation? How would I practically walk through a choice like that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And just to reflect on what you were saying before, for me, it's around the tension between loving the world too much and not loving it enough. And I think when we look at different Christian expressions of being a part of society, we see different ways that tension hasn't always been navigated well. So do we love the world enough, or do we love it too much? When it comes to thinking about what we buy, I think there are basic questions to ask around how has it got here? What has it been made from? Has it been made from something that is lasting? Has the natural environment been damaged by the extraction that's been needed to make it? Is it something that's going to be durable, or is it something I'm just going to throw away and replace? What about the people who've been involved in those processes? Have they been paid a proper wage for growing it or rearing it or making it? It's a kind of list of questions like that, some basic questions that I would say are probably pretty hard to answer fully when it comes to buying a plate. But we may be able to think of those questions, particularly around, say, the food that we buy and consume, and the clothes that we wear, and I'm just looking at my laptop as I talk to you, technology that we use. But even with plates, I would have thought the main question there is around whether it's disposable or not.
Mm.
Um, has it come from plastic? Are we going to wash it up and use it again, or are we just going to dump it and then buy another one another time?
Mm-hmm.
And as you go through this journey, as you learn more, you develop what I call an ethical nose, a kind of ethical instinct, where it's impossible to know everything about everything, and things are very complicated. But you can develop a kind of instinct for the sorts of things that
Mm-hmm.
that are good to do and that might be more, or the things that might be more harmful.
Mm. That's super helpful, Ruth. And if I could summarize what I heard in what you were sharing, and also just from reading that chapter, one of the kind of a framework or principles to think about in choices. Number one seems to be this question of, do I even need this?
Yeah.
And slowing down and to ask that initial question and identifying the difference between a want and a need. I think you
Can I just
described.
say with that, I've put in a little discipline in my own life that I'm never allowed to buy something straight off when I see it. If I'm in town or something, I always have to go home, wait a day, and then decide whether it's still something that I want, that I'm going to buy. And most of the time, I find that by that point, I think, no, actually, I don't really need it. It was just going to pass by.
Yeah, I think in your book you describe that exactly that way, as I don't impulse buy, which I think is a really helpful first step. And then this next thing that you're describing is asking these questions about, where did this come from? How was it made? And trying to walk through the complexity of those questions. And as you said, sometimes those questions don't have easy answers. Sometimes they don't have answers at all. And if that's the case, really trying to develop that ethical nose and getting better and better about identifying where things might have gone awry. And as you say in the book, paying attention to people, the environment, animals, and politics, and how those things might be at work in any of those places.
Can I point you to another resource that would help?
Please. Yeah.
This is a book that has come out more recently since just called L is for Lifestyle. And it's a really practical look at all of these kind of issues. It's a practical look at how we can live well in this world in a way that takes care of other people and takes care of the natural world. So reading this would help you develop that ethical nose.
Well, wonderful. And then the last point, and then we will let you go. But you spoke really well to this just now, and I just want to lift it up, that always this kind of fourth principle of balancing our budgets, what we can afford with the ethical implications of this purchasing choice. And really the best way to do that is, as you mentioned, to take this longer view of time. How is this purchasing choice good across time, not just for now? So I really found that to be helpful as well in thinking about what we were buying.
Right. And if I can just add on top of that, is not to feel guilty. I always say, do what you can, and then push yourself to do a little bit more.
Yeah.
Don't feel guilty about the things that you can't do. Focus on what you can do. And there are no rules. We're all in different situations and have different family circumstances and different budgets and so on. So do what you can and focus on that, and don't worry too much or feel too guilty about the things that you can't do.
Well, thank you so much, Ruth. And then also to add to that, that we're not alone, that we have our communities that we are doing this with, and can be creative with and make plans with. So thank you for helping us begin with our plans, and thinking about just ways of engagement with how and what we buy. So I really appreciate your time. It's been such a joy to be with you.
Thank you. Well, bless you. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. We hope that was inspiring. And Ruth, Dr. Valerio, she's such a joyful person to be with and a wise person to be with. So we are going to go ahead now into breakout rooms for about 10 minutes. And we have the questions in the chat for you. Russ also put the PDF in the chat, so you can scroll up and find it there. And we sent them via email. So however it is easiest for you to have them, they are there for you. And we are now going to go off into the ether, into the breakout rooms.
All right, if everybody's ready, here we go.
Yes.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Yes.
Hello.
I know this was too short. I'm sorry for the short conversation time, but there's a good reason for it.
Yes. And with that, we do want to allow everyone to share thoughts and things that came up in your breakout rooms, but the best way for this part of the presentation is just if anything came up for you that really stood out in your conversation, just go ahead and pop it in the chat, and we will save the chat and share any tips or questions or things with the rest of the community as we send out Going Deeper resources. So please feel free to continue to do that as we go along. But we will turn now over to Russ, who is going to walk us through some more of the historical, environmental, and then very practical questions about the story of our stuff.
Yes. So, and just real quick, I don't know if any of you noticed or caught in the emails that went out today and also on Tuesday, that we recommended a couple of videos to watch. If anybody was able to watch those ahead of time, will you just say, give us a thumbs up in chat or say, yes, I did, or if you have absolutely no idea what I'm talking about, that's fine as well. just curious as to if anybody actually caught that or was able to look at them. And with that, though, let's go ahead and move on. So to get us started, we're going to revisit real quickly the drawdown model. And we talked about this in our very first session with Dr. Bagley. And if you remember the gray box of the atmosphere in the middle, that is our atmosphere. And the greenhouse gases particularly is what we're focused on here that are warming our planet. The left side of this graph are the things that add to those emissions, add to those greenhouse gases. And the right side of the graph are the things that actually take away from those greenhouse gases. Those are where the planet helps us out. The land sinks and the ocean and coastal sinks that actually remove the warming gases out of the atmosphere. And you can see, if you remember, those are imbalanced, and about 60% of the greenhouse gases that we put into the atmosphere every year actually remain there. So this month, we're actually focusing in on the industry, and related to that is the transportation section. So together, these are about 35% of the sources of emissions that go in. And this is industry is all of the stuff that we make, right? That's our plates, like we talked to, like Ruth and Kaylee talked about not too long ago. But it's also the clothes we wear, the shoes we wear, our cars, all of the work and things that we do, and the transportation is moving all of those things around. So that includes the boats that ship these things across the ocean, the railways that move them across our country, and the cars and trucks that move them around from there. So before we get too far into this, we want to set a little bit of the context. And I know, and we all know that we have been and seen an endless parade of environmental impact statistics, the memes and the Facebook sharing posts, the Twitter posts, the Instagram posts, and all the infographics, and we're aware of that. We've been talking about this for decades, and so I want to try to take a little bit of a different look at it tonight, and I'm going to share a little bit of context and a little bit of these kind of infographic things, just to set the stage for what we're talking about. And please know that our intent is not to shame anybody or to make you feel bad. But it's really just to get an understanding of what's going on. And I kind of approach this from a place of curiosity and just wondering what was happening in these things. And the first thing was actually, we've seen all this data, and why is this problem getting worse? Why are we still talking about this? Like Kaylee said, right? And we hear a whole bunch about consumption and trash and what's really happening there. And finally, we're going to really focus in on what can we do about it. And so the model tonight, I'm going to share some general things real quickly. And then we're going to really kind of focus in on a case study of a fictional church and walk through how a church might make a decision in this space. So let's take a look at the big picture first. So people. Well, I'm about 50 years old, little more than that. And so I thought as we go through this, we'd actually do a comparison and we'd think about what was this like when I was a kid back in 1970. And back in 1970, we had 205 million people in the country. And that's actually changed quite a bit. By 2020, just 50 years later, we were up to 330 million people. So that's a 60% increase just in 50 years. Amazingly, we added 125 million new people to the country just in that short period of time. And I mentioned spending and kind of consumption. The US Bureau of Economic Analysis does a handy number that actually measures annual personal spending for the country. And if we look back in 1970, that was about $3 trillion, okay? And I was absolutely floored to learn that by 2020, that had jumped to $12 trillion, okay? That's 4 times what it was in 1970. And just so in case you're wondering, these are inflation adjusted numbers. So we're actually comparing apples to apples. These are actually, all of this is in 2012 dollars. So we're comparing the same numbers to the same numbers, and we're spending 4 times as much as we used to every year as a country.
And this is personal spending.
Personal spending. All right, and then we've mentioned trash. So let's, the EPA, our government does a great job of tracking statistics. I will say that. There's all kinds of really useful things available. And the EPA actually measures how much solid waste we put into landfills. And in 1970, that was 120 million tons. By 2020, that had grown to 300 million tons. That's a 150% increase. So to really get a look at this, though, we have to not look at it as a country, but ask the question, well, what's happening individually, right? And so let's look at how much we're spending individually. And back in 1970, we actually spent about $17,000 a person. And by 2020, that had jumped to $47,000 a person. And again, this is in inflation adjusted dollars. It's a 170% increase. So yes, we're spending a whole bunch more as a country, but we're also spending more as individuals. And let's look at our waste just for a quick second as well. 1970, that was 1,100 pounds per person. By 2020, that had jumped to 1,800 pounds per person, okay? And just for fun, that's a 54% increase, but let's say if we took an average of 200 people in a church, if we took the trash of 200 people in a church, what does that look like? Well, in 1970, that was 247,000 pounds. By 2020, that was 372,000 pounds of trash. Okay, we're filling up and overflowing our sanctuary by this point, just with the 200 people that are in church. Okay, so I hope that kind of gives you an impact or an idea of some of the larger statistics. And before we kind of leave this general picture, I wanted to ask the question of, well, how are we doing compared to the rest of the world? And from a population standpoint, the US has about 5% of the world's population, the 330 million people out of almost 8 billion. So when we ask, well, how does this compare? Well, for example, in paper, we use 1/3 of the paper of the world in just 5% with just 5% of the people. We use 1/4 of the oil. For other resources, we use almost 24% of those. But the one that really got me when I was looking at this was waste. With just 5% of the population of the planet, we generate half of the waste. It's just an amazing number to me. So what do we, before we move on, let's just ask this question. What if everyone lived like we did? What if we took the rest of the 95% of the planet and lived like we did? Well, we would actually need 5 planets to support the way of life that we have. And 5 planets to pull all those resources from, and we need 2 of those 5 just to store all the trash. So it's actually a lot of things. So what did we learn from all of this? Well, I was surprised that we are really buying a lot more stuff as individuals, and when we add all that up as a country, it's a lot more. We're spending and buying a lot more stuff than we used to, and more of our stuff ends up in trash and in landfills. And as part of this research, I was actually looking at recycling, and because recycling is part of the waste discussion. And one of the things that I knew recycling was struggling, but in 2020, plastic recycling dropped to only 9%. So only 9% of the plastics that we're using actually were able to be recycled in 2020. And that's, at this point, we just need to stop with the plastics. We're not going to talk a lot about it tonight, but suffice to say that plastics just need to stop. And then finally, I think the last takeaway from this is that in the US, we really do use and throw away a lot more than the rest of the country. So that's kind of the things that we took away. And when we stop and think about this, we know all this, but why do we still keep doing it, right? And I think Ruth hinted this in her presentation, where she talked about we're being trained to be these wonderful consumers. We're being taught that more, fast, and cheap, those are the things that are good. Those are the things to pursue in life, right? And we also, we buy a lot of little inexpensive things, and we don't take the time to add them up and see what they look like over time. And it turns out that those little purchases, when you put them all together, add up into a big number. And the last thing I want to really touch on quickly is this idea of planned obsolescence. You probably know what planned obsolescence is. Just in case, it's when we design things to stop working after a period of time, right? We design our computers to last for 6 to 10 years and then stop working. Our phones do the same thing. Almost every kitchen appliance that we have will last for 10 to 12, maybe 15 years and stop working. Companies have figured out that if they design things to stop working after a period of time, people will just buy a new one instead of trying to fix it. And that ends up being better for the companies over time. And this idea of planned obsolescence has kind of reached a pinnacle in the idea of our single-use disposable items, right? So that's taking that idea of planned obsolescence literally as far as you can go. We use it one time, we throw it away, and then we have to get another one. So we see the same pattern with cars, with household items, electronics, fashion. We mentioned single-use items. They all follow the same pattern. So what it ends up with is that we buy more and more stuff. And sometimes it's because the stuff we had just stopped working. And it was literally designed that way. So let's think about the church for just a second and all of the things that we as churches kind of purchase and use. And there's a lot of categories of things you might think about. The hospitality and fellowship items are our coffee hours, our welcome gifts, the meals we eat together at church. There's a lot of little things that go into that, right? The plates and forks and cups and napkins and all of that. We have all of these worship days and feast days and services, and we print bulletins and flowers and have tablecloths and candles. We do a lot of ministry and outreach things. You might think of the things that we give to our children and youth, the adult education programs, all the pamphlets and brochures and books and things that we hand out. And then we have a whole bunch of special events and celebrations. And finally, you might think about the staff and our facilities on church. We clean all of those things. We use soaps and paper towels. Our bathrooms have stacks of paper towels. And so there's a lot of these little things that we use all throughout the church. And as we start to look at this, when we go back to that idea of this church waste, right? And we think about how much this has grown. One of the key things we want to ask here is what is our responsibility as churches to really model a new way and do something about this, right? How do we celebrate, gather, love people? How do we do that without generating 372,000 pounds of trash, right? Um, and if we're really valuing relationships, like we talked about in Ruth's presentation, how do we do this in a way that actually honors those relationships and doesn't dishonor the relationship to the world around us at the same time? So sometimes this is really hard. And so to really get at this question, we decided to actually do a case study. So we're going to dive into that right now and just kind of walk through the idea of what if a small church was trying to make a decision like this? What would it look like? So we're going to talk about Hope Community Church. It's a fictional church, about 200 members. It's a church in a suburb near a large town. Most everybody in the church knows everybody. The church loves to gather and share meals together, loves to eat. There's always 2 or 3 people competing of who's going to make the best pie. And all of these things go together. They've recently formed a green team. And the green team is looking at how the church can be more environmentally friendly. So, the green team started by looking at all these statistics and things that we shared and decided to really just walk into church and open up the supply closet and see what we're using. So this is what we're going to start with. We're going to start with just taking inventory. What are we actually using in the church? So our green team went to church, opened up the supply closet, and they saw a stack of paper plates, some cups and coffee cups, some paper plates or some napkins and paper towels, a box of plastic knives and forks, and stacks of water bottles. So if we just start with these things, and there's more, you could think about those categories of the church and put yourself wherever it makes sense to in that story. But let's just think about these things and see if there's anything we can do about them. Well, why don't we ask this first question? How much of this stuff do we really use? And what do we use it for? Well, this is our coffee hours, our potlucks and meals together, the staff use during the week, all of those youth groups and Bible studies and pizza parties and all the various things that we do as a church. It's part of being family. We get together, we eat, we do these things, our celebrations and gatherings. And how much of it do we really use? So the green team decided to count and just really add it all up. And when we look at it, in a month, when the church is meeting regularly, we know COVID's impacted all of these things and churches can't gather as we used to, but hopefully we'll be back to doing this again soon. And it's a lot. It's 500 paper plates and cups. It's 1,100 napkins and paper towels and 500 of these little water bottles. And when you add it all up, it's 3,300 actual items a month. Now, the green team in thinking about this and being curious, just ask that question. I know we're supposed to look at these things over time, but what if we looked at this over 10 years? How much stuff is that? And it turns out that that's over 400,000 things just in 10 years. Well, how much does all this cost? That's a natural next question. And so when you look at it and you say, okay, well, none of these things cost very much by themselves, at 20 cents, 5 cents, 25 cents. When you add them up, it's $407 a month. But even that doesn't feel like it's that much, right? I mean, $400 is still a lot, but it's not that much. But again, if we look at this over 10 years, it's almost $50,000. And this is that idea of a lot of little things, when you put them together, they add up to a really big number. So let's ask the next question. What's the impact of these 400,000 things? How does that impact the things around us? Well, just those items are 7,500 pounds of trash that we're taking to landfills. All of that paper that gets contaminated with food, none of that is recyclable. So that literally is all going directly into landfills. And a lot of it was plastic in the initial look. To buy all of that stuff, somebody made 120 shopping trips, okay? They may have been delivered to you or you may have gone shopping to buy them, but somebody made 120 shopping trips and all that stuff was wrapped in about 1,000 plastic bags. So in addition to that, we've gone through 54,000 plastic drink bottles, water bottles, soda bottles, whatever that might be. And all the paper to make that stuff is the equivalent of 142 trees, okay? And I'm gonna take just a short diversion into trees for a second because I love trees for one. And we're going to talk about Douglas fir trees, which are one of the most commonly grown trees, and a lot of them get used in making paper. So let's have a little person here. And Douglas fir trees grow fast. In just 10 years, they'll grow to 30 feet tall, and they will have stored 1,000 pounds of CO2. The University of New Mexico provided this great tool for calculating the amount of stored carbon in a tree based on its size. And so as this Douglas fir tree grows, by 30 years, it's up to 90 feet tall. By 40 years, 120. By 50 years, it's 140 feet tall. And it's stored almost 100,000 pounds of CO2 just in one tree. And here's the thing that really gets me, is that when we're making these paper plates and cups and all of the things that we're using, it's those 50-year-old trees that we're cutting down. And when we say it's 142 trees, it's not 142 10-year-old trees. It's 142 50-year-old trees. And so when we think about that, just the carbon stored in those trees and all of that carbon, that 100,000 per tree, that all gets released back into the atmosphere as we process it and turn it into paper plates and cups and throw it in landfills. And so just the carbon impact from those trees is 14 million pounds of CO2. So how else could we do this? So the green team, being curious about these things, decides to look at things. And our first option is, well, instead of throwing all the stuff in landfills, let's use compostable items. Things that we're going to do the same thing, but we're going to use compostable ones and actually put them through a composting process instead of going into landfill. And that would be a good change. Alternatively, we might also think about switching to reusable items. And as we think about this, let's just kind of look at and see if this is even really an option. So the first, option A, compostable items. Let's run through these. We can find some plates and cups and paper towels and utensils and water bottles. Let's stop here. There's not really a good option for compostable water bottles. Okay, we can't go buy a case of bottled water that actually comes in a compostable bottle. It's just not available. So we'd have to do something. One option might be providing these reusable bottles. Those are expensive though. Instead of $0.25, these are $3.75 each. So, but that might be an option. When we think about reusable items, we can run through these, right? We can find a plate and some cups and glasses. We can buy a bunch of cotton hand towels instead of paper towels, utensils, and actually use the reusable water bottles here. But these things are a lot more expensive each. And if you think about it, we're going to need a lot of them for 200 people, right? So, and on those reusable items, we also have to clean them. Right? So we're going to need a dishwasher. In fact, we might need two. We're going to need a washer and dryer to wash and clean all of those hand towels that we bought. And if we're going to use reusable water bottles, maybe we'll provide some water bottle stations for people to fill up. So all of this stuff is going to cost money. It's also all going to have to be installed somehow, and that's going to cost money. And we're going to have to run these things, right? And buy the soap and filters and all of the electricity and water that goes into making this possible. And all of that's going to take money. So maybe our reusable things might be a little more complicated than we thought. So let's find out how much this costs. We'll go back to compostables. Let's run it through. Okay, we know how much each of these things cost now. We know how many we need. So if we actually switched to paper plates, cups, paper towels, and utensils, and we use compostables instead of the items that were going into landfill before, that would now be $485 a month. And this is assuming that we didn't do anything about water bottles, because there's not really an easy choice there. Now, if we decide to do something about water bottles, in over 10 years, that's $58,000. So our costs went up a little bit. If we do something about the water bottles, we can actually, let's say we decide we're going to buy 2 water bottles for every person in the church, okay? And we're going to buy 400 of those bottles, it's going to cost us $1,500 just to buy those water bottles, but that's way less than the $15,000 we were spending before on water bottles. And if we do that, we can bring this whole compostable and reusable water bottle solution below what we were already spending. Okay. Now let's look at reusables. And we got to remember, we're going to buy a whole bunch of these other items, and we're going to go through all of the equipment and installation and cleaning. So how much do these things cost? Well, let's buy a plate and a cup for every person, 2.5 towels for every person, some utensils, and those same 400 water bottles. And we're going to spend $3,200 on just the items. What about all that equipment? Well, we're going to need a couple of dishwashers. We're going to need to get that installed. We're going to need some water filling stations. We're going to need to get those installed. We're going to need a washer and dryer. And when we add all that up, it's going to be $7,000 just in the equipment to keep these things clean. And then let's also look at real quick the operating costs. And this, I was actually really surprised that I didn't realize the operating costs were so much in these things. But if we have a dishwasher that we run 4 loads a week of, it turns out that each load, when we count the water, the soap, the electricity, the gas to heat the water, all of that, it turns out to be about 80 cents per load. And that's $1,600 just in cleaning those dishes. The laundry is the same thing. If we did one load a week, that's $598. We have to buy those water filters that we got for the filling stations. That's another $2,000. And we know that some of those plates and cups are going to get broken or lost or damaged in the process of being used. So let's assume we're going to replace 25% of those. So that's another almost $5,000 just in that. But when we add all of this up over 10 years, we buy the reusable items, we buy the equipment to actually clean those things, and we operate them, the total comes out to $15,000. So how does that compare? If you think back to our original things of these plastic and non-compostable items that we used to buy, and the original cost on these was $48,000. Okay, that's what we were spending. When we look at our compostable option, instead of that $48,000, we can actually bring this down to like $44,000 if we do something about the water bottles, the drink bottles. There's $15,000 in cost in there. If we can do something there, we can really make compostables work. But the reusables, this is where it's really interesting. So here, this total is $15,000. But the big impact when you think about this, even if we're using compostables, we're still using 342,000 items in compostables. Now that came down a little bit because we switched from those 54,000 water bottles to only 400 drink bottles. But that compares to 1,700 items. Okay, it's just a fraction of the amount of stuff. And if you think back on those 120 shopping trips and all the plastic bags and just think of the accounting of submitting all of the reimbursements for those things, right? The reusable stuff is really, really a lot less expensive. So, but it's not quite the whole story. We have to make it, this looks like a simple choice, but we're looking at 10-year costs, and a lot of times people would be thinking about this in terms of a single month. Well, those compostables, if we break it down to a month, is only $372. The reusables are $129. It's about a $240 a month difference. And what do we have to do if we're using the reusables? Well, we have to have volunteers that we coordinate to wash the dishes and bring them in and out and move them around and get through all of that. And that can be some work. So the choice, even with saving a lot of money, is not always clear. So how do we choose this? Well, on the one hand, we saved $30,000, and that's going to be, if we think back to our good framework, right? That's good for us, and it's good that we're actually saving that money. And all of those, either of those options are going to do what we need it to do. The plates are going to work as plates, the forks will work as forks. So either of those choices are really good for us. One of them saves us a lot of money. Good for neighbor. I spent some time here trying to figure out who is my neighbor in when I buy a paper plate, right? And and this is where that Ruth's comment came in, just turned out to be so true about sometimes we just can't know. Because when I think about those paper plates or the compostable plates, well, the tree might have been cut in the Pacific Northwest, shipped to China for processing. A giant factory there actually made paper and pressed it into paper plates. We shipped it all the way back to the US. Some truck drivers moved it around the country into a big store where we went and bought it and then brought it home. I don't know who my neighbor is in that process. I don't know any of those people individually, right? There's really no way to know them in a lot of cases, because sometimes those plates actually are mixed with trees from all over the world, and there's just no way of knowing. So, but there are a few things we can know. We do know that if we use the reusable things, we save 7,500 pounds of trash. And we do know that there's at least those 142 trees that we save and the 14 million pounds of carbon that was saved in the process. Now, the carbon savings are going to be a lot more than that because of all those trips back and forth and traveling all over the place. There's just no real way to calculate what that is. So if we choose, and think about this, what would you choose if you were the green team going through this? And that's a question we can talk about in just a minute. And let's just say that the green team at Hope Church actually decided to choose using the reusable ones. And they do that whole implementation process. They talk to their vestry and council, and they get it approved. It probably takes a year to do all of that. It's going to take a little while to go through the churches to get it approved and done. And when they're doing that, let's just say what happens here? Well, maybe a family comes to church one day and says, "Hey, I see you're using these plates and things. I use a lot of paper plates in my house. What would it look like if I switched my house? And did I ever add up what does it look like for a family of 3 people?" Well, the green team decided to look at it. Being curious, they realized that, wow, just a family of 3 is going to use 284,000 items and spend $32,000 in disposables. If they had switched those same items in a household to reusable ones, about a dozen plates and cups, some towels, some hand towels and utensils, and reusable water bottles. Oh, and by the way, let's buy a dishwasher and a washing machine and a dryer as well, and all of the power, water, and soap and supplies to operate them. That totals only $7,000. So when I saw this, I was like, wow, we really, as individuals, have been trained so well as consumers, right? We don't think about the cost of these little disposable items. We don't think about the environmental costs. We don't think about the actual cost. We think they're convenient and inexpensive. And in reality, we're spending 5 times as much on those items and generating 284,000 items that go into landfill instead of 110 that don't. So being inspired, maybe this family decides to switch, they tell a few friends. And what would this look like if just 50 families in church did this? Well, those 50 families in disposables would have been using 14 million disposable items and spent $1.6 million. If we had done this in reusables, it would just be, I didn't add up 110 correctly, but it would be $11,000 in just those items, a total of $356,000. We would save, for just these 50 people, if they switched, $1.3 million. We'd eliminate 1.2 million pounds of trash, and 6,000 trees would be saved in the process. And that 297,000 tons of CO2 would be prevented from going into the atmosphere just from the trees. So I want to kind of leave our case study here. And I hope that gave you a few things to think about. I know it was a lot of numbers. We went through them really quickly. Know that we have recorded all of this. And if you want to watch it back, we're going to send out the recording next Tuesday, and you can certainly do that. And so let's take a breath. we're going to transition just a little bit here. And I don't want us to just think about the disposable items of plates and glasses and cups and all of that. And there are other things that we could do. And Kaylee, if you want to run us through a little bit of this as we've talked about it.
Yes, thank you so much, Russ. This is, yes, a lot to take in. You can stretch, you can just breathe for a second, but there's a lot to face, but there's a lot of possibility. And I think when we're looking at this as church and asking that question, what is our responsibility and how can we model a different way? And just as some ideas, making a executive call that we want to honor your time and we will just spend this remainder of the time together in one group here rather than going into breakout rooms.
Yeah.
Let's just rapid fire off. What are some different ways we can model this? Well, beginning like the Green Team and Hope Fictional Church, assess what you have. A lot of churches already have a lot of these plates and cups and reusables, and your congregation has a lot of these things. And if you got together and took an assessment of these things, then you may be able to help one another make this just transition for way less than even the models of the numbers that we looked at today. Another thing we might think about is, could we buy in bulk? Could we buy our condiments in bulk, our food, our nuts and things that we use for coffee hour? Could we buy our soaps in bulk? Could we maybe become a wholesale account for our church and our community and bring that cost down for everyone, have people bring in their jars to church to fill up these things, right? Like soap and shampoo, who knows? Could you create a sharing network or a sharing hub where you have a place where people in your church could just ask for what they need and say, hey, I need a screwdriver. And oh, it turns out such and such person has one. Maybe you also create a repair and restore team who helps repair things when they break, sew a button on and teach others to do the same. Perhaps maybe thinking about a quarterly clothing exchange with, particularly with kids' clothes. We have so many children and families in our churches, and those clothes, we only wear them a few times when the kids are young. So exchanging these things regularly, sharing. Going back to those water bottles or hot cold bottles, maybe we give those as welcome gifts. Give everyone one as a welcome gift, stainless steel, bamboo, or glass, and put your church logo on it. And then maybe invite your congregation, because we see again that if we just do this as a church, that's amazing and that saves so much. But when we do this beyond the church, again, just like the gospel, going beyond our church walls, that impact multiplies tremendously. And it also saves not only in the environmental impact, and that is tremendous, but also in cost, and allows us to consider things like, what could we do with all of that extra funds? How could we gift that back into the world? Could we hire someone part-time from the youth group to help us wash our dishes? There's so many possibilities. So we wanted to leave you feeling empowered that you have everything you need to begin this work now, where you are with your community in the way that is most unique and true and relevant for you. So just as we close, we want to just open up this space to share ideas with one another. We won't go into breakout rooms, but just, are there anything that stood out to you? Are there any ideas that you have? You can put them in the chat. We'll share the chat with others, but also if you want to just unmute yourself and share, we'll take a few minutes here to talk together as we close.
Yeah, and I did just also want to add that this was just a case study of one of these areas, and there are multiple areas that the church and us as individuals can step into this. So if there's any other things to share in that. But speaking of this example, I don't know, Robin, if you would like to share really briefly how this is.
Yeah, you actually just did our church for us. We did this about 5 years ago.
Oh, good.
But we already had all the plates and the cups and the utensils, but we had such a small fellowship group that they just kept purchasing plastic and paper, and a small group from our council. So, we're a congregational church, everything has to go through its time frame. Went back and said this, and this, and the big argument was, well, who's going to do the dishes, and what are we going to do with this? And because everything was done by hand back then. So figuring out the costs, we bought a a really good dishwasher that has lasted us and will last us for a long period of time. It's a fast dishwasher, doesn't use a lot of water because we also live in a water droughted area. I live in Fresno, California, which is an arid area, because we also zero-scaped our property, so we were already saving water. The hardest part was to get through some of the folks who were used to doing things a certain way, or their team was so small. But what we found was there was plenty of people who were pro-green, that they were willing to volunteer throwing things in the dishwasher, which takes, I think, 2 or 3 minutes to wash. It's an amazing machine. So it doesn't take any time. But taking stock of what we had and how to change it, and we already had the things we needed to move forward. It was really an easy transition. Unfortunately, it took almost a year to move through, but that's what happens in a congregation, and that we have more buy-in, and then people are more willing to participate in that. And at the same time, we gave water bottles, reusable water bottles to everyone. And then we also give them to people who come and visit. So we continue that. We also give them a bag for grocery shopping with our name on it. So
that's great.
we like to continue that. But anyway, that was our process. So thank you for highlighting our church this evening.
Yeah.
No, that's great. That's it. And so I'm just curious if I could ask, as we were sharing this, do the numbers make sense to you? Does that yeah?
Yes, very much so. Not as high as yours were when we started our looking, but it's still growing in such a tremendous waste area that we just couldn't look at it. And water, again, was a big issue, which you don't use in yours, but for us, it was a huge issue. How much water are we going to use for this? And then we're trying to say, but but anyway, it's a much better decision on our part, ecologically. So.
Good. Well, I'm glad you shared. Thank you for taking the time to share that with us. And is anybody else who would like to share anything quickly?
Yeah. We have time for maybe one more person, and then we'll let you all go. But I see these great things coming in chat as well. Thank you. Bringing your own plates, silverwares, napkins, encouraging people to do that. This is a good time for a reset, for having these conversations, Peggy. This is a great time to open this dialogue in your church community. Coffee mugs for coffee time, absolutely. And really too, I appreciate, Robin, you uplifting the cost of water. So thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, and Peggy also, mentioning that this is with COVID and things like that, giving the reusable beverage bottles, and actually looking at putting in some of those water dispensers and even coffee dispensers allows everyone to start to fellowship again. And it's a win on all levels.
Yeah.
One of the interesting things, since we have just a second, when you think about the relational items too, as part of our research in this, and some of the resources we'll share with you next week, we actually found that there's still a plate manufacturer that exists in the United States. That there's a lot of real high-end ones that are kind of small specialty manufacturers, but there's one left in the United States that hasn't gone overseas to China or somewhere else. And Becky was actually able to call them and have a conversation with the president on the phone. And I was thinking, wow, there's practically no way you could have a relationship with the manufacturer of a plate or somebody that's significantly involved in a paper plate product, right? And what a difference to be able to actually call up the president of a small plate manufacturer based in Arizona, and have a conversation with them and say, hey, we're talking to churches about this. What could we do? And they said, oh, well, we have these plates, and they cost $3 or $4 a plate to do, but I also have some seconds that have maybe a little cosmetic blemish here or there, and
on the bottom.
on the bottom of something. And
we can give them to the churches for 75% off. So we're talking to folks about other solutions to pass on to you all and get these things.
And that's that's the difference in being able to have a relationship as part of the transaction, right? That's not something we could do if we're buying a whole bunch of paper plates, but it's a conversation that can open up and be possible because we're thinking about longer term longevity items and things like that. So anyway.
So thank you for that story. And again, we are thinking about this in as many ways as we can. And we want to help you all and help your congregations as you help others too make these just transitions. So with that, and I see all these stories in the chat. Thank you for sharing. We're going to save the chat, and we will give you the information from the chat in the Going Deeper resources. Thank you for hanging in with us. We hope that you feel encouraged and empowered and not shamed. We do not want to be participating in that at all. This is a journey, but we also feel a responsibility to be honest. So thank you for journeying with us. We are so grateful for this community. Be well, be whole, have a happy Easter, because we won't see you before then.
Yes.
And
A couple other.
And the Going Deeper resources will be coming to you next Tuesday. Ruth's books, some data, places to look at this data if you're thinking about ways to tell this story. And then also, as we close, Russ, can you just go back one more slide?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. As we close, just a summary. How do we model purchasing that is good? Buy less, take inventory of what you have, purchase for longevity, think relationally, not transactionally, and be creative. Create these share and repair programs. So lots of other options, but just a quick summary. And then lastly, but not least, our next session is after Easter. And it will be on all things that cycle: soil, compost, water. And so we look forward to that time with you. Going Deeper resources next Tuesday. Hang out in the virtual community. Talk about this stuff with your congregations. Be well. We appreciate you. We'll see you soon.
And hey, if you guys would just give us a thumbs up or what you thought. Were you overwhelmed with all of this, or did it feel good? Was it helpful? Love to just have a 30-second feedback that you can just drop in chat. How was this for you guys? Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Robin, for sharing too.
Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely.
Be well. We'll see you soon.
Blessings. Happy Easter.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Bye.
Good. Not overwhelming. Good. Helpful. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. That's great feedback. Okay. Be well. Be well. Bye.